Snowcroft Manor stands as a looming reminder of Alaska's brutal and unforgiving winters, its gabled roofline piercing the endless white sky. Built in the late 1800s during the height of the gold rush, the manor was intended to offer refuge to weary prospectors, luxury for those who had struck gold, and a temporary haven for those still chasing their fortunes. Yet, its history has overshadowed its beauty, leaving behind a reputation so dark that few dare to even utter its name. On a particularly cruel night in the winter of 1897, a storm unlike any the region had seen descended upon the Snowcroft Manor. The winds screamed through the mountains, piling snow high against the walls, sealing the doors and windows shut. Nearly 30 souls found themselves trapped inside: miners, traders, and the manor's small staff. Supplies dwindled quickly as the storm raged on for weeks, cutting off all hope of rescue. And that's when the whispers began. Quiet murmurings of figures moving in the dark, of shadows watching from the corners. By the time the thaw came, none of the 30 survived. 10 rescuers finally breached the ice-laden doors. The scene inside was nothing short of horrific. Frozen bodies lay scattered throughout, some appearing to have been clawed at by human hands. Dining tables were littered with remnants of meals that couldn't have come from any pantry. Most disturbing of all, however, was the presence of bloody handprints on the walls, leading to a single room, room 306, now known as the Cursed Room. Legend has it that those who perished never left the manor, and anyone who spends the night in room 306 is doomed to encounter the echoes of their hunger and desperation. Clara's experience, a night she would never forget. When Clara Hensley arrived at Snowcroft Manor, the storm warnings were already in effect. The roads leading to the manor were treacherous, lined with towering snowdrifts and icy patches that made her rental car shudder with each passing mile. But Clara, always the skeptic, brushed off the warnings as atmospheric theatrics, a convenient backdrop for her investigation. She was determined to spend one night in room 306, capture any evidence of the paranormal, and debunk the manor's reputation as little more than folklore. Night unfolds. By 10 p.m., the storm outside had intensified, rattling the windows and howling through the cracks in the walls. Clara wrapped herself in a blanket and reviewed her notes, occasionally glancing at her equipment. The hours ticked by uneventfully, her camera capturing nothing more than her own fidgeting. At midnight, she began to feel the weight of disappointment creeping in. Perhaps, she thought, the legends of Snowcroft Manor were nothing more than exaggerated campfire tales. Or more accurately, Clara could only watch as the shadows grew darker, more defined. One hovered directly above her, its presence so cold that she could see her breath in the air. The whispers grew deafening now, a cacophony of voices pleading, "I'm so hungry," until Clara could take no more. She grabbed her camera and bolted from the room, leaving behind her other equipment in her frantic escape. The aftermath. When Clara reviewed her footage the next morning, now safely back in her car, far from the cursed manor, she discovered something chilling. The camera had captured more than just shadows. As she lay frozen in terror on the bed, faint figures materialized around her, their faces gaunt and hollow, their eyes sunk in pits of darkness. They reached for her, their skeletal hands hovering inches from her skin. The recorder, retrieved days later by a local historian brave enough to enter the manor, revealed something even more haunting. Beyond the whispers of, "I'm so hungry," there was laughter, childlike and cruel, and the faint sound of chewing. Clara never returned to Snowcroft Manor. She didn't need to. The evidence she gathered that night was enough to convince even the most hardened skeptics. The ghosts of Snowcroft Manor are real, and their hunger is eternal. Perched on the rugged cliffs of Cornwall, England, the Elysian Rest stands as a brooding silhouette against the gray skies and roiling seas. The hotel, a sprawling Victorian-era structure with arched windows and weather-worn stone, was built on the ruins of an ancient abbey. The abbey, abandoned in the 14th century, had its own dark history, stories of monks who dabbled in forbidden rituals, their fates sealed by mysterious disappearances. Over time, the ruins became a forgotten relic of Cornwall's past, until the 1800s, when the Elysian Rest was constructed atop its crumbled remains. But the past, it seemed, refused to be buried. The 19th century, the hotel had earned an unsettling reputation. Guests often spoke of eerie occurrences, Shadowy figures gliding through corridors, the distant echo of chanting, and, most terrifyingly, sightings of a headless monk wandering the halls at night. The monk's apparition was always accompanied by the faint scent of salt water and the sound of dripping, as though he had risen from the sea itself. Adding to the lore were a series of unexplained drownings, bodies of guests found washed ashore with no explanation of how they ended up in the water. The locals began to whisper that the Elysian Rest was cursed, its foundations tainted by the Abbey's dark secrets. Lara's experience. A night at the Elysian Rest. When Clara Hensley arrived at the Elysian Rest, the sea was calm, and the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the rugged cliffs. Yet, even in daylight, the hotel exuded an air of melancholy. The wind carried the faint, briny scent of the ocean, and the sound of waves crashing below seemed almost mournful. Clara, determined as ever to uncover the truth behind the hotel's haunted reputation, checked into room 212, an ocean-facing suite rumored to be a hotspot for paranormal activity. The room itself was charmingly dated, with faded floral wallpaper, a clawfoot bathtub, and a large window overlooking the sea. But as Clara settled in, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The air felt damp, heavier than it should, and the faint scent of salt lingered, stronger here than in the lobby. The first signs. The strangeness began subtly. That evening, as Clara unpacked her equipment, a digital recorder, a night vision camera, and an EMF detector, she noticed water droplets on the floor near the bathroom door. The bathroom was dry, and there was no sign of a leak, yet the droplets formed a trail leading to the bed. Curious, she wiped them away and set up her camera facing the room. By midnight, the air had grown colder, and an unnatural silence enveloped the space. Even the rhythmic sound of the waves seemed to have faded. At around 1 a.m., Clara noticed the first true anomaly. The dampness in the room had intensified, and the windows, though shut tight, were fogged with condensation. Her EMF detector spiked erratically, the lights flickering as if responding to an unseen presence. She checked her camera but found nothing unusual. Yet, the dream that wasn't exhausted, Clara eventually drifted to sleep. Her rest, however, was far from peaceful. In her dream, she found herself standing on the edge of the cliffs, the hotel behind her bathed in an eerie blue light. The sea below churned violently, and from the depths she heard a haunting chant, a low, rhythmic intonation in a language she didn't recognize. Before she could move, invisible hands pushed her forward, and she fell into the icy embrace of the ocean. The water was suffocating, pulling her down with an unnatural force. Her limbs felt leaden, and as she struggled, she caught a glimpse of shadowy figures beneath the surface, faceless forms with outstretched hands reaching for her. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the water. Just as darkness overtook her, she woke with a gasp, her body drenched as though she had truly been submerged. The hunting escalated. Shaking and disoriented, Clara reached for her recorder, desperate to capture her thoughts while they were fresh. But as she pressed play, she froze. The device, which had been recording since midnight, was filled with sounds that chilled her to the bone. Faint chanting echoed in the background, growing louder and more distinct as the hours passed. Interspersed with the chant were the unmistakable sounds of splashing water and a wet, dragging noise, as though something, or someone, was moving through the room. She turned to her camera, reviewing the footage with trembling hands. At first, the video appeared normal, showing her sleeping fitfully. Then, at 3:13 a.m., the image warped. The room grew darker, and a faint, mist-like figure emerged from the bathroom, leaving a trail of wet footprints as it moved toward the bed. The figure paused at the foot of the bed, its outline flickering, before leaning over her sleeping form. Though it lacked features, its presence radiated malice. Moments later, the figure vanished, leaving behind only the trail of footprints and the oppressive dampness that now filled the room. The morning after, when daylight finally broke, Clara felt as though she had survived an ordeal far beyond anything she had anticipated. The room, now bathed in sunlight, seemed almost normal, yet the dampness lingered, and the faint scent of salt water still clung to the air. Determined to leave, she packed her belongings in record time. Before departing, she reviewed the hotel's guestbook, her curiosity piqued despite her fear. The entries were mundane until she reached a page marked with water stains. One entry caught her eye, a scrawled note from a guest who had stayed in room 212 years earlier. It read, "The monk watches, the water calls, don't stay." As Clara drove away from the Elysian rest, the sea seemed to follow her, its waves crashing with unusual ferocity. She couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel, and whatever lurked within it, wasn't finished with her yet. The mister had, when she reviewed her footage later, she realized something even more disturbing. In the background of her final shot of the room, just before she left, a faint figure could be seen standing by the window, its head tilted unnaturally as though watching her go. The Elysian rest, Clara realized, was not a place of rest at all. It was a trap, a siren's call for the living, and a sanctuary for the restless dead. In the heart of the Mexican countryside, where the heat shimmers in the air and the scent of blooming jacarandas mingles with the dust of history, lies the grand Hotel Castillo del Oro. The hotel, with its sprawling courtyards, terracotta roofs, and ornate ironwork, is a testament to colonial opulence. Yet beneath its beauty lies a legacy steeped in blood and whispers, a history that stains its walls as surely as the sunburnt hues of its tiles. Originally built as a hacienda in the early 1800s, Castillo del Oro belonged to the De la Vega family, one of the wealthiest landowners in the region. Known for their vast gold mines and extravagant lifestyle, the family's fortunes were as legendary as their rumored cruelty. Stories of enslaved miners, questionable alliances, and betrayals painted a dark portrait of the De la Vega. Their gilded world came crashing down in 1827 when, during a particularly lavish fiesta, the hacienda was attacked by a group of disgruntled miners and rival factions. The massacre that followed was swift and brutal. Every member of the family, from patriarch to child, was slaughtered. As the legend goes, the family's gold, a fortune beyond imagination, was hidden somewhere on the property, cursed by the dying words of the family matriarch, "Let no one profit from our suffering. Let gold bring ruin to those who seek it." Over the years, treasure hunters and curious guests who sought the gold either vanished or left haunted by inexplicable experiences. The hacienda, shunned by locals, eventually transformed into a luxury hotel in the mid-1900s, drawing wealthy visitors with its beauty and its dark allure. Clara's arrival. When Clara Hensley arrived at Hotel Castillo del Oro, the afternoon sun bathed the hacienda in a golden glow. The kind that felt almost too fitting for a place with such a sinister history. The staff greeted her warmly, though their smiles faltered when she requested to stay in room 23, the suite where the massacre of the family had begun. Known as La Habitación de Sangre, the blood room, it was infamous for inexplicable cold drafts, strange noises, and a heavy sense of dread. The room itself was strikingly beautiful, with high ceilings, hand-painted tiles, and a large canopy bed draped in white linen. But as Clara unpacked her equipment, she couldn't ignore the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to press down on her chest. The air carried a faint metallic tang, like old blood, and the ornate mirror above the dresser seemed to catch reflections that didn't quite match reality. The discovery as Clara prepared to set up her camera and recorder, she noticed an uneven creak beneath her feet. Curious, she knelt and found a loose floorboard near the foot of the bed. Prying it up revealed a shocking discovery. A single gold coin, tarnished with age and smeared with what appeared to be dried blood. The intricate engraving on the coin depicted the De la Vega family crest, a symbol that had become synonymous with greed and betrayal in local folklore. Clara's fingers tingled as she held the coin, a sensation that left her unnerved. She placed it on the nightstand and continued her setup, making a mental note to research the crest and any possible connections to the curse. The night unfolds. By midnight, the temperature in the room had dropped significantly, forcing Clara to wrap herself in a blanket. She reviewed her notes, the coin glinting ominously on the nightstand beside her. The stillness of the night was soon broken by an unsettling sound. The soft clink of coins falling. Her breath quickened as another sound emerged, as though a treasure chest was being emptied onto the floor. The giggles of children playing. Clara turned louder, camera, more distorted, night vision lens unnaturally around the room. The sound grew louder, froze as the mirror above the dresser began to coins were spilling, as though something was breathing on the other side. Trembling, Clara lifted the blanket and felt beneath her pillow, followed by another and another, something until the entire mirror seemed to teem with ghostly imprints. Dozens of them littered her bed of greed, their golden sheen visible even in the dim light. Overtook shook Clara, but when she turned on the lamp, into a restless sleep. Her dreams were vivid and nightmarish. She stood in a grand banquet hall filled with opulence, the De la Vega family seated at a long table. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow. The table was laden with gold coins, which the family members scooped into their mouths with feverish desperation. Clara tried to back away, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Suddenly, the family turned to her, their hollow eyes locking onto hers. The matriarch reached out with skeletal hands and placed a coin in Clara's mouth. "You too will pay the price of greed," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. Clara choked on the coin, the metallic taste overwhelming her as she struggled to breathe. She woke gasping for air, her throat dry and raw. Her body was drenched in sweat, yet her hands were cold, as though she'd been holding ice. The coin on the nightstand was gone. The morning after, when the first light of dawn crept into the room, Clara wasted no time packing her belongings. The oppressive energy of the room seemed to cling to her, making every movement feel labored. As she reached the door, she glanced back one last time. The mirror above the dresser was clear again, but etched into the fogged surface of the glass were the words, "Leave while you can." Later, as she reviewed her footage in the safety of her car, Clara discovered something chilling. The audio from her recorder captured not just the sounds of coins and laughter, but faint voices whispering in Spanish. The translation sent shivers down her spine. "It is not yours. It will never be yours." The curse lives on, though Clara left the Hotel Castillo del Oro physically unscathed. She could not shake the feeling that something had followed her. The gold coin she had found reappeared days later on her desk, clean and gleaming as though freshly minted. She locked it away, unwilling to touch it again, but the whispers and dreams continued, a haunting reminder of the curse tied to the De la Vega family's greed. The Hotel Castillo del Oro remains a beautiful yet sinister relic of the past, a place where history refuses to rest and where the price of gold is far too high. Nestled amid Kyoto's lush hills and tranquil bamboo groves, the Jade Pavilion is a striking blend of elegance and eerie allure. The hotel, a carefully preserved relic of Japan's Taisho era, combines traditional architecture with modern luxury. Its lacquered wood panels, tatami mat floors, and ornate shoji screens exude timeless beauty. Yet beneath its serene facade lies a chilling history, a tale of love betrayed, curses unleashed, and restless spirits. The pavilion was originally the estate of Lady Ayaka Takamura, a noblewoman known for her grace and intelligence. In the late 19th century, she lived there with her husband, a prominent samurai-turned-politician. Their marriage, a union of tradition and status, seemed idyllic to outsiders. But whispers of infidelity began to circulate, rumors that her husband had taken a mistress and planned to replace Ayaka. Betrayed and humiliated, Ayaka retreated to the pavilion's gardens, where she was often seen in her favorite blood-red kimono, staring into the koi pond. One night, she disappeared. The next morning, her body was found in the garden, floating lifeless in the pond. Clutched in her hand was a note that read, "This house shall know no peace, as I have known none." From that day forward, the estate was said to be cursed. Servants reported seeing Ayaka's ghost wandering the grounds, her crimson kimono a stark contrast against the pavilion's verdant backdrop. Guests at the newly opened hotel in the early 1900s began to report strange occurrences, windows that refused to stay shut, whispers in the corridors, and the unmistakable figure of a woman in red standing in the garden. When Clara Hensley arrived staring up at their windows with an unrelenting struck gaze by its quiet beauty. The hotel seemed like a sanctuary, far removed from the chaos of the modern world. The koi pond shimmered in the afternoon sun, and the air was filled with the soft rustle of bamboo leaves. Yet, as she stepped inside, a subtle unease crept over her. The staff were polite but distant, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. The air in the lobby felt unusually heavy, as though the building itself held its breath. Clara was assigned room 8, a corner suite overlooking the garden where Lady Ayaka had met her tragic end. The room was exquisite, with delicate silk wall hangings and a low wooden table set for tea. But the large window facing the garden gave Clara pause. As she unpacked, she felt an odd sensation, as though someone were watching her. When she glanced at the window, her own reflection stared back, but for the briefest moment, she thought she saw another figure standing just behind her, a flash of crimson in the corner of her eye. Reflections of fear. As night fell, the tranquility of the Jade Pavilion began to shift. The once soothing sounds of the garden, the chirping crickets and rustling leaves, took on a discordant, unsettling tone. Clara set up her recording equipment, determined to document any signs of the supernatural. At 11 p.m., she noticed something strange. The mirror on the far wall of her room seemed darker than it should have been, its surface cloudy and uneven. When she approached it, her own reflection appeared faint, overshadowed by a shadowy figure in red standing just behind her. She spun around, heart racing, but the room was empty. Shaken, she grabbed her camera and began filming. Reviewing the footage moments later, she saw what her eyes couldn't: the figure of a woman in a blood-red kimono, standing motionless in the garden below, staring directly up at her window. The vanishing staff. By midnight, Clara had resolved to leave. The oppressive atmosphere of the room was becoming unbearable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. She quickly packed her belongings and headed to the lobby, only to find it deserted. The front desk was abandoned, the lights dimmed, and the only sound was the faint tapping of her footsteps against the wooden floor. Outside, her car refused to start. No matter how many times she turned the key, the engine remained silent. Panicking, Clara returned to the lobby, calling out for help, but her voice echoed unanswered. The staff had vanished as if they had never been there. Feeling trapped, she returned to her room, hoping to wait out the night until daylight brought some semblance of safety. The woman in red. At 3 a.m., Clara was jolted awake by a chilling sound. The whisper of her name, low and guttural, as though it came from deep within the earth. Her body froze as she felt an oppressive weight at the foot of her bed. Slowly, she turned her head, and her breath caught in her throat. There she was, Lady Ayaka. Her crimson kimono was pristine, its vibrant colors stark against her pale, expressionless face. Her hair hung in wet strands, and her dark eyes seemed to pierce into Clara's soul. Ayaka's lips moved, but the words were incomprehensible, a mix of guttural whispers and mournful wails. Clara couldn't move, couldn't scream, as the ghost leaned closer, her icy breath brushing against Clara's face. The figure suddenly stood, gliding to the window without a sound. As she passed, Clara noticed something horrifying. Ayaka's reflection lingered in the mirror, even though her body had moved. The ghost turned back one final time, her lips curling into a sinister smile before disappearing into the shadows of the garden below. The morning escape. When dawn finally broke, Clara fled the hotel, leaving behind her equipment and luggage. As she drove away, the car finally roaring to life, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The Jade Pavilion stood serene and beautiful in the morning light, betraying none of the horrors it harbored. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't truly escaped. The haunting sound of her name whispered in her ears, a chilling reminder of her night at the pavilion. When she later reviewed the footage from her camera, Clara saw something she hadn't noticed before. In every clip, no matter where she pointed the lens, there was always a glimpse of red, sometimes faint, sometimes vivid, but always there. The Jade Pavilion, Clara realized, was not just haunted, it was alive. Its curse rooted deep in the betrayal and pain of Lady Ayaka, and those who stayed within its walls became a part of its tragic, unending story. Clara sat in her rented apartment, surrounded by scattered notes, photographs, and video footage from her journey. It had been a long and exhausting series of investigations, each hotel more horrifying than the last, each encounter with the supernatural more intense and unsettling. Yet as she pored over the details of the experiences she had documented, something started to take shape, something darker than anything she had anticipated. At first, Clara had assumed the hotels she visited were simply victims of their histories, haunted by the vengeful spirits of the past. She had set out to document strange occurrences, to uncover the stories behind the eerie phenomena that guests had long whispered about. But as the nights wore on, the encounters grew more vivid, more personal. Her dreams had become plagued with figures in red, flickers of faces in mirrors, and voices calling her name. At first she had dismissed these as the side effects of stress, but now she realized they were something more. Each hotel had left a mark on her, each experience more sinister than the last. Clara had seen the woman in the blood-red kimono at the Jade Pavilion, heard the desperate whispers at Hotel Castillo del Oro, and felt the ice-cold fingers brush her skin in Snowcroft Manor. She had captured footage, recorded sounds, and written notes, but it was only now, when she reviewed everything in silence, that the pieces began to align. She glanced down at the stack of photographs in front of her, each one taken at a different hotel. Each one had a common thread, a symbol that didn't make sense at first glance. In the image from the Jade Pavilion, there was the faint silhouette of a gold coin glinting in the shadows. In the photo from Snowcroft Manor, the reflection in the window had captured a fleeting image of a woman's face, her mouth stretched wide in a scream. And in the footage from Hotel Castillo del Oro, Clara had noticed something strange. A symbol etched in the corner of an ancient wooden beam, obscured by dust but unmistakably there. As Clara stared at the symbols and objects she had documented, coins, mirrors, crimson cloth, etchings, something stirred in the depths of her memory. She flipped through her research notes, her fingers tracing a passage that seemed to call to her from the pages. A ritual of binding, hidden in the symbols of wealth, loss, and blood. A cycle that must be completed by a chosen guest. It hit her like a thunderclap. The symbols, the coins, the kimono, the mirrors, the blood-stained floors were all part of something far older and darker than she had imagined. A forgotten ritual, one that had been practiced centuries ago, had been dormant for decades, even centuries, until she, Clara, unknowingly triggered it by staying in the hotels. Each hotel represented a chapter in a cursed story, and she had become the unwilling protagonist. The ritual of binding them. The ritual, as Clara now understood it, was a dark and ancient practice tied to death, wealth, and the eternal suffering of the betrayed. It was a cycle that bound the spirits of the wronged, those who had been murdered, betrayed, or lost everything, to the material world through objects tied to their pain. Gold coins, mirrors, robes of red, and ancient symbols. These objects were markers, meant to draw the spirits into the material realm, to bind them forever to the earth, and to those who sought to uncover the truth. It was clear now that each location she had visited held a piece of this ritual. The Jade Pavilion. The woman in the red kimono was Ayaka, the betrayed wife, and her red robe was the symbol of the curse that tied her to the land. The koi pond, once a symbol of tranquility, was now a gateway, keeping her spirit anchored to the pavilion. Hotel Castillo del Oro, the gold coin she had found in the floorboard, was not just a symbol of wealth. It was the anchor to the souls of the De la Vega family, cursed by their greed. The coins she heard falling in the night were not a warning. They were a sign that the curse was awakening. Snowcroft Manor. The snowstorm that trapped her and the other guests was no accident. The whispers of hunger she heard in the night were the cries of those who had resorted to cannibalism, their spirits bound to the manor as punishment for their desperation and greed. Each hotel had been a part of a larger pattern, a ritual tied to Clara's own fate. She had become the latest guest of these restless spirits, unknowingly completing the ritual by simply being there. But the ritual required one final step, one final offering, and that offering was Clara herself. The haunting intensifies as Clara sat with her thoughts. The air in the apartment seemed to grow heavier. The temperature dropped and her breath became visible, misting in the cold air. The lights flickered, and she heard a faint sound, like the rustling of fabric. When she turned, her heart stopped. In the reflection of the window, she saw the woman in the red kimono, standing just behind her, her face pale and ghostly. Ayaka's eyes were empty, hollow, yet full of an unearthly sorrow. Clara stood frozen, unable to move. The woman's mouth opened, whispering her name. Clara, Clara. Her voice was guttural, like a death rattle. Then, with a flash of cold air, Ayaka was gone, but Clara felt an undeniable presence. The spirits from the hotels had followed her. They were not finished. They had come for her. In a panic, Clara grabbed her camera and rushed to the living room, determined to document everything. But as she reviewed the footage, her blood ran cold. On the screen, she saw something that she hadn't noticed before, a symbol, glowing faintly in the corner of the frame. It was the same symbol from the wooden beam in Hotel Castillo del Oro, from the mirror at the Jade Pavilion, and from the blood-stained floor in Snowcroft Manor. It was an ancient sigil, she now realized, was meant to bind the living to the spirits forever. The final revelation, Clara's world began to unravel. She had unknowingly triggered the final act of the ritual. She was no longer just an observer of the haunted hotels. She was part of their story. The restless spirits, bound to their cursed locations by ancient rituals, had found a new vessel in Clara. Her presence at each hotel had allowed the curse to grow, and now it was complete. She had become the latest guest, trapped in a cycle of eternal suffering, just like those who had come before her. In a final, desperate attempt to break free, Clara sought out experts on Japanese folklore, ancient rituals, and the occult. But no matter where she looked, no matter what she read, she could not escape the truth. She was bound to the ritual. The spirits would not let her go until the cycle was complete, and Clara was part of the sacrifice. As she stood before the mirror one last time, she saw her reflection, faint at first, but slowly becoming clearer. The figure of a woman in a blood-red kimono appeared behind her, her arms reaching toward Clara's reflection. The ritual was complete. Clara had become the latest guest. The world knew Clara Hensley as a curious investigator, a brave soul voice echoed in her mind behind the whisper of the spirits forever entwined with her podcast and spectral truths. Clara became part of the loyal following, a restless soul bound to hear her latest findings and the eerie tales waiting for the next unwitting guest to come and complete the cycle. Each episode had been meticulously crafted, the sounds of creaking doors, faint whispers, and unsettling music setting the stage for the chilling stories she told. Clara was a storyteller at heart, but somewhere along the way, the stories began to tell her. Her last episode, episode 42, was never meant to be the final one. Clara had promised her audience a grand conclusion to her investigations, a revelation that would tie all the haunted hotels together. But when the episode finally aired, there was no sign of Clara. No warning, no final goodbye. Only the eerie hum of an empty recording room. The episode was uploaded posthumously, her disappearance barely a footnote in the world she had left behind. It opened with the usual quiet static, followed by Clara's familiar voice. Steady, calm, almost too calm. Clara's voice. I never thought it would end like this. I thought, like any good investigator, I could piece together the pieces of a puzzle, tie the strings, and leave with the answers I'd been searching for. But I was wrong. The puzzle doesn't have answers. It has a conclusion, but it's not one that can be understood, not one that can be explained. It just is. And it's taking me with it. The sound of her voice was distant, as though she were speaking from a faraway place, one that was not quite here and not quite there. The faint background noise, wind howling, an occasional knock, a distant door creaking, added to the growing sense of unease. Clara's voice. I've learned the truth. I've discovered what I never should have known. Each of the hotels I visited, the Jade Pavilion, Snowcroft Manor, Hotel Castillo del Oro, and the Elysian Rest, are all part of something larger, something ancient. Something I now understand is far more than just a haunting. It's a cycle, a ritual, a curse that can never be broken. There was a sharp intake of breath, followed by a soft, almost imperceptible sob. The sound sent a chill down the spine of anyone listening. It was clear that Clara was no longer the same person she had been before. The strong, determined investigator had been replaced by someone broken. Clara's voice. I thought I could outrun it. I thought I could leave the hotels behind, go home and move on, but they've followed me. They've followed me here, to this room, to this place I can't escape. It's happening again. The symbols, they're everywhere, the coins, the mirrors, the red robes, and now I hear them. Soft whispers, footsteps in the dark. I can't run. I can't hide. They want me. There was a long pause in the recording, followed by a sharp click. Then, the sound of coins clinking, softly at first, but growing louder and more insistent. Clara's breath quickened. A faint sound of rustling fabric echoed through the recording, followed by a distant, hollow voice. Voice! Clara's voice broke into the recording again, trembling and almost unrecognizable. Clara's voice. They're here. They're inside my head. They're inside me. I thought I could control it, contain it, but I've made a mistake. The ritual, it's not something that ends. It's something that consumes you, and now I'm part of it. For a moment, the recording fell silent, as though Clara had paused to collect herself. But it was clear that whatever had happened, she was no longer the woman who had started this journey. She was fading, disappearing from the world she had once known. Then, just as quickly as the silence had settled, a voice broke through, low, guttural, and unmistakably not Clara's. Clara, come to us. The sound of a door creaking open was followed by a strange rustling, like fabric being dragged across the floor. The tension in the audio was unbearable. As the podcast came to an end, Clara's final words were nothing more than a fragmented whisper, as if she were speaking from a place that wasn't quite of this world. Clara's voice. I can't escape. I'm one of them now. I've joined the ranks of the lost souls, but maybe that's what they want, to keep us all, guest spirits, forever trapped in this endless cycle. The last sound that could be heard was a faint, hollow laughter, distant, ethereal, and somehow familiar. Then the recording abruptly cut off. The aftermath. Clara's final podcast episode was met with shock, confusion, and disbelief. Her disappearance was reported just days after the episode went live. No trace of Clara was ever found despite an extensive investigation. The police found her apartment untouched, her belongings still scattered across the floor, her camera still on the desk. There was no sign of forced entry, no clues as to where she had gone or whether she had truly left at all. The public reaction was divided. Some believed it was a publicity stunt, a carefully planned ending to her podcast career. Her podcast had become immensely popular, and many thought she had orchestrated the final episode as a way to leave her audience with an unforgettable twist. After all, she had been obsessed with the supernatural for so long. Was it really so hard to imagine that her final episode was merely a well-executed performance? But others, including some of her most loyal followers, believed the truth of her disappearance was far darker. They pointed to the eerie tone of her voice, the unsettling sounds that filled the recording, and the way she described her descent into madness. Clara had sounded different in that last episode, broken, terrified, as if she were being consumed by something far beyond her control. Conspiracy theories swirled. Some believed that Clara had been taken by the spirits she had investigated, pulled into the same curse that had claimed the other guests of the haunted hotels. Perhaps, they speculated, Clara had become another restless soul, her voice, her presence, forever part of the eerie stories she had once told. Some even claimed that strange occurrences began happening to those who had listened to her final episode. One listener reported seeing a figure in a red kimono standing at the foot of their bed, while another heard faint whispers calling her name. And then there were the strange reflections in mirrors, reflections that didn't belong to the person staring into them. The truth was elusive. No one knew for sure whether Clara had truly vanished, whether she had become another victim of the cursed hotels, or whether her final episode was a chilling work of fiction. But one thing was certain: the mystery of Clara Hensley would never be solved. Her podcast, Spectral Truths, remained a haunting reminder of her investigation, her obsession, and the dark force she had unknowingly awakened. And in the shadows, the spirits waited, their whispers carried on the wind, calling out to those who dared to listen. The story of Clara's descent into madness and her disappearance remained open-ended, a question that would never find its answer. And for those who dared to ask, the true horror was not in the answers they sought, but in the eerie possibility that Clara had, indeed, become part of the legend she had so desperately tried to uncover. But the most curious part had been the legend, an identity that Clara had indeed become part of the legend that her death party had so desperately tried to uncover.